I think those of us who've been a military spouse for a while, or even just a couple of years and have learned something, it's so beneficial to information share. And unfortunately, I think so much of that is informal. There's not a website you can go to. There's not necessarily a book you can read, although Naval Services Family Line does publish a very good introduction to being a Navy spouse called Sea Legs. But there's no manual. And so when you add the extra layer of being an employed, working, professional military spouse, it adds an extra layer of challenges. And then personally being a federally employed military spouse, that has its own unique set of challenges. And so often your career, by the nature of the demands of the military, comes second. And so how do you balance all of those? Well, in my case, being also a parent and a spouse and a student. My name is Emmalee Gruesen, and I am an active duty Navy spouse and a Navy civilian employee. I have to give credit to a boss I had a number of years ago. Her name was Patty Lang, and she's a former military spouse, and now a retiree, military spouse, retired military spouse. And in my work life, she taught me to always know my authorities. So, what law, what policy gives you the authority to make this decision, or guides your judgment on this issue. And so in my work life, I deal with a lot of policy, and I'm always seeking the answers. And so often those answers are hard to find because maybe that policy is not public, or maybe it's just buried in 7,000 pages. And so in all of the work that I've been doing, so much of what I want to do as a military spouse advocate, and I'm new to that title, I'm only recently embracing that, is really to promulgate information and to put it out there for military spouses and others to find. And luckily we've had some success at times asking Senate staffers to query offices and pull the string on that when we can't find it ourselves. So that's been really beneficial in our congressional work, and I have to give credit to Senator Shaheen's staff for helping us on that at points. But whether I'm writing a LinkedIn article and I have a couple I need to draft, or we're talking about writing an op-ed, so much of this is simply to promulgate information for other people, maybe to point out issues, but really to put it out there for military spouses to find. It's so hard to find information. And pivoting a little bit to the executive order, one of the pieces that talking to the other military spouses who provided feedback and information to the executive order, I think I can claim credit for this piece. There's a piece in the executive order that tasks the military service JAGs, Judge Advocate Generals, with some responsibilities in educating military spouse employees, or employees who happen to be military spouses who are getting orders overseas. And it's specific to SOFA and other supplementary agreements. So SOFA is the Status of Forces Agreement, and those Status of Forces agreements are an agreement between a host nation, example Italy or Japan, and the US about what are the rules surrounding how we can station our service members in their countries. And it goes both ways. There's maybe financial considerations or other things addressed in those SOFA agreements. But we don't update SOFA agreements very frequently. They get updated every 30 or 50 years. And so in addition to SOFA agreements, there are things called supplementary agreements, or agreed views is sometimes what they're called. And those are just kind of, hey, we're going to have a sidebar conversation. This is not addressed in the SOFA, but we're just going to say, here are a couple items, and we want to put them on paper and say we agree. And so that just happened with Italy for military spouses who are teleworking for U.S. employers, and that's wonderful. That's a logjam that's existed for at least 20 years, if not longer. Although, telework and remote work are newer concepts, but that's huge. However, SOFAs and the supplemental agreements are not public knowledge. And so in the executive order, there's information tasking the legal assistance attorneys with providing information to military spouses on, basically anything that could impact their ability to work remotely for a U.S. employer while stationed overseas. Now, the executive order leaves any information for employers themselves unaddressed. It specifically says, you will not provide information to the employers themselves. And I think that's somewhere we have some room for improvement, because employers don't have access to this information either. And even if you're a JP Morgan Chase or a big Fortune 100 company, you can't buy an attorney who has access to those agreements. And I think that's a place that the Department of State, who is the lead for Department of Defense, and, again, this would have to be appropriated by Congress, or, they can't do that in the mechanisms that they have currently, but creating these teams or offices that can do that outreach to private employers would be really beneficial. We've seen it with licensure, state licensure, where they have an office that helps within DoD that helps work with states to ensure the spouse reciprocity of their licenses is occurring. And, I think that's a good model that could be established for, employer support. And it could definitely be an offshoot of the military spouse employment program. If you're a partner within MSEP, why not offer those partners that help and that assistance, and at the very least put together a white paper that kind of outlines these things that anyone can access and read. And I understand why the SOFAs and the other agreements aren't public. It makes sense. They're in effect legal contracts, but there are things we can do without saying, hey, here's what the SOFA says. So often it's not what the SOFA says, it's what it doesn't say. It's so easy in the military and the government to be siloed. And so when we provide information and we share information and we put together a website, or we write a LinkedIn article, or even it's, a Military Times article, Stars and Stripes, that information being out there helps people. And so much of what we do, there's a small group of military spouses that have been working either within ERGs, employee resource groups, or outside of them. My agency, Department of Defense, doesn't have any employee resource groups for military spouses. But in working with that small team, lobbying Congress, talking to joining forces, the White House's initiative for military spouses, it's all about putting down a ladder to help somebody else up. I think in the military, whether it's in my civilian job or certainly you hear it from the Marines a lot, embrace the suck is a term. And, I don't think military spouses should have to embrace the suck. I don't think anybody should have to embrace the suck. If you're not making the situation better for somebody else, you're contributing to the problem. And because it takes military spouses so long to even just figure it out, maybe a couple of years to start to see these issues or experience them, and I didn't meet my husband at the beginning of his career. I met him halfway through it. So at 15 years in his career, I'm just figuring this out. And if I can help somebody else not take 5 years to get to the level and knowledge and information that I have, I think that's a win. And so for so many of us, our driving factor is just to make it better for others.